The vast expanse of space shimmered with a silent, cold beauty as the intergalactic trade vessel Odyssey drifted toward its destination. Stars dotted the black canvas of the universe, casting faint glimmers across the ship's metallic hull. Inside, Stephen Mackenzie stood by the observation window, his reflection pale against the void, his mind whirling with anticipation and a gnawing sense of the unknown. He had been part of the crew of Odyssey for 3 years now, traveling between distant planets, exploring uncharted territories, and forging diplomatic ties with alien civilizations. But this mission was different. The planet Izeron 5, a world shrouded in mystery and cloaked in secrecy, was home to the Velara civilization so advanced and so isolated that few had ever made contact with them, and fewer still returned. Stephen had read all the reports. The Valar had rebuffed every attempt at communication for decades. Now, after an unexplained change of heart, they had invited the Odyssey to their world under strict conditions. No weapons, no drones, and only a small team allowed to set foot on their soil. They demanded total compliance, or the consequences would be severe. It was a risky mission, but the promise of an alliance with a race as powerful as the Valar was too enticing for the Galactic Federation to pass up. Stephen wasn't the captain of the vessel, nor was he one of the senior officers, but his role as a xenobiologist and explorer had earned him a spot on the landing crew. His natural curiosity about alien cultures had gotten him this far, and it was that same curiosity that had kept him restless since the briefing. What would they find on the planet below? What secrets did the Valar hide? The voice of Captain Hensley crackled over the comm system, breaking Stephen's reverie. Landing crew, prepare for descent. We'll be entering the atmosphere in 10 minutes. Stephen took a deep breath, feeling the familiar flutter of excitement and anxiety. He glanced around the observation deck one last time, watching as the planet Izeron 5 came into view. It was a world of deep green and blue, its surface shrouded in thick clouds that parted occasionally to reveal lush, unspoiled landscapes below. From this distance it looked peaceful, serene even, but Stephen had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. As he made his way to the shuttle bay, the rest of the landing team was already suited up and checking their equipment. Commander Josiah Pratt, a no-nonsense leader with a reputation for efficiency, nodded at Stephen as he entered. "Ready for this?" Mackenzie Pratt asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "As ready as I'll ever be," Stephen replied, securing his helmet. Pratt gave a sharp nod. "Remember, we stick to the plan. No wandering off, no deviations from protocol. The Valar were clear on that." Stephen forced a smile. "You know me, Commander. I'm all about protocol." Pratt smirked, but the gravity of the situation quickly returned to his face. "Good. Let's keep it that way." The team boarded the shuttle, and within moments, they were descending toward the surface. The atmosphere thickened around them, and the shuttle's hull groaned as it cut through the dense clouds. The viewport revealed more of the planet's surface as they approached a sprawling jungle with massive, towering trees that seemed almost unnatural in their size and structure. Rivers snaked through the forest like veins of liquid silver, shimmering in the faint light that pierced the clouds. When they finally broke through the last layer of atmosphere, the landing zone came into view. It was a clearing near the edge of the forest, where ancient stone structures jutted out of the ground like the bones of a long-dead creature. The Valar had given them coordinates for this precise location, but there were no signs of life. No welcoming party, no indication of where they were supposed to go. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, and the landing ramp extended. The team stepped out into the humid, thick air, their boots sinking slightly into the soft, mossy ground. The sounds of the jungle were all around them, alien birds screeching in the distance, the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush, the occasional buzz of some insect-like life form whizzing past their helmets. Stephen took it all in, his senses heightened by the strangeness of the place. It was beautiful, in an untamed, dangerous sort of way. The air smelled faintly sweet, with an undercurrent of something metallic, something ancient. "Keep your eyes peeled," Pratt ordered, scanning the tree line with a suspicious gaze. The Valar could be watching us. The group moved as one, careful not to stray from the designated path. The stone structures loomed larger as they approached, their surfaces etched with intricate symbols and patterns that pulsed faintly with a dim light. Stephen's curiosity flared. The carvings were unlike anything he'd seen before, alien glyphs, swirling and shifting, as if alive, almost hypnotic in their complexity. "What do you make of this?" one of the crew members, a geologist named Lara, asked as she studied the stones. Stephen knelt beside one of the pillars, running his gloved hand over the surface. "These symbols, they're not just decorative. They might be part of some sort of energy system, maybe even communication. But it feels like more than that. There's something alive about them." Pratt raised an eyebrow. "Alive? Let's not get carried away, Mackenzie." Stephen stood, but he couldn't shake the feeling. There was something about this place, something ancient, powerful, and undeniably alive. His mind buzzed with questions, but before he could voice them, a movement caught his eye. Far off the path, partially hidden by vines and moss, stood an ancient temple. Unlike the other structures, this one was far larger and more imposing. Its angular design was out of place among the organic chaos of the jungle, its dark stone surface reflecting no light. There was an eerie stillness to it, as if it existed outside of time, waiting for something or someone. Stephen's pulse quickened. He should report it to the commander, but something held him back. A deep, gnawing curiosity clawed at him, urging him to investigate. The team was moving further ahead, unaware of his hesitation. "I'll just take a quick look," Stephen muttered to himself. In and out. Without alerting the others, Stephen broke away from the group, slipping into the jungle and making his way toward the temple. The air grew thicker, more oppressive with each step. The sounds of the jungle seemed to fade, replaced by a heavy silence. Vines clung to the temple's walls like the fingers of some long-forgotten giant, and as Stephen reached the entrance, he felt a strange pull and invisible force urging him inside. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping through the massive stone doorway. Inside, the air was cool and stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed for centuries. The walls were covered in more of the glowing glyphs, their light pulsating softly, like a heartbeat. The deeper Stephen ventured, the more alien the atmosphere became. The temple's corridors twisted and turned, narrowing in some places and opening into vast chambers in others. It was a labyrinth, designed to disorient, to confuse. But Stephen couldn't turn back. Something was calling to him, pulling him deeper into the temple's bowels. As he rounded a corner, the corridor opened into a massive central chamber. At its center stood a towering statue of a figure tall, imposing and unmistakably Valar. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and beneath it, the floor was covered in symbols he didn't recognize. Before Stephen could take another step, the shadows in the chamber shifted, and figures emerged from the darkness. The alien guards appeared without a sound, their sleek forms materializing from the shadows like phantoms. Their eyes, glowing with an eerie luminescence, locked onto Stephen, and before he could react, they closed in. Hands gripped his arms, their strength overwhelming, and Stephen found himself being dragged deeper into the temple. Panic surged through him, but his struggles were useless. The guards moved with silent precision, their faces expressionless, their grip unrelenting. Stephen's heart pounded as they descended into the bowels of the temple. The air grew colder, thicker, as if they were descending into the very core of the planet itself. Fear clawed at him, but his mind couldn't stop racing with questions. Who were these guards? What did they want with him? And why had they waited until now to reveal themselves? Finally, they reached their destination, a massive, cavernous chamber bathed in an eerie, ethereal glow. At the far end of the room, seated on a throne of dark stone, was Queen Athra. Her presence was overwhelming, suffocating. She was tall, impossibly tall, her form bathed in a shimmering, ethereal light that seemed to bend the very air around her. Her eyes glowed with a cold, otherworldly intelligence, and her face, though beautiful in a haunting, alien way, was devoid of warmth or compassion. Stephen was thrust to his knees before her, his body trembling under the weight of her gaze. His mind screamed for answers, but all he could do was stare up at the alien queen as she regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Human," she said, her voice soft yet filled with the weight of authority, "you have ventured where you do not belong." Stephen's throat was dry, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to. I was just." She raised a hand, silencing him. "You were chosen. Your arrival was foretold." The weight of her words sent a chill down Stephen's spine. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but nothing fit. He had come on a peaceful mission. How could they have known he would come here, to this temple, to this moment? Queen Athra rose from her throne, her tall, lithe figure moving with a grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. She descended the steps slowly, each movement deliberate, as if she were savoring the moment. "You were drawn here for a reason," she continued, her voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. "Your arrival marks the beginning of something far greater than you can comprehend. The time has come for my daughter to fulfill her purpose. And you, human, will play your part." Stephen's breath hitched in his throat. "What do you mean?" The Queen's cold smile sent a shiver through him as she uttered the words that would seal his fate. "If you do not mate with my daughter, I will kill you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, echoing through the vast chamber, swallowing the silence that had settled between them. Stephen felt his heart pound against his ribcage, a primal, visceral reaction to the impossible situation that now unraveled before him. The temperature of the room seemed to drop, though it could have been the icy fear that now seeped into his bones. He couldn't move, his body was frozen, not by the guards still holding him in place, but by the sheer magnitude of the Queen's demand. "If you do not mate with my daughter, I will kill you." There was no emotion in her voice, no malice, no anger, just a calm, cold statement of fact. The casual way she spoke, as if this were a mere formality, sent a fresh wave of panic through Stephen. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. His mind raced for some kind of explanation, some way out of this nightmare, but the only thing he could feel was the oppressive weight of her authority. Queen Athra watched him with her piercing, otherworldly eyes, her tall form towering over him. There was something deeply unsettling about the way she carried herself, an air of absolute control, as though every movement, every word was calculated. She was beyond him in every conceivable way. Alien not just in appearance, but in presence, in her very being. It was as if she stood on a plane of existence far removed from his own, gazing down at him from a vantage point he could never reach. The alien guards flanked him, their grip tight on his arms, but it wasn't their physical restraint that bound him. It was the Queen's presence, her towering, ethereal form, that seemed to fill the entire chamber. Stephen felt as though the walls of the temple were closing in on him, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of her power. Finally, he managed to find his voice. "Why?" His words came out weak, barely audible in the vastness of the room. Queen Athra stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "You wonder why you were chosen, human? Your species. Your genetic makeup is unique, diverse, resilient. You are unlike any other creature in this galaxy, and it is that resilience that we need. My daughter must carry within her the strength of both our kind and yours." Stephen swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Your daughter, where is she?" A soft sound, a shifting of fabric, or perhaps the quietest whisper of movement came from the shadows behind the Queen's throne. For a moment, Stephen thought he saw something in the dark recesses of the chamber, a faint outline of a figure watching him from the gloom. Then, from the shadows, a shape emerged, stepping slowly into the light. It was Princess Elira. She was taller than Stephen but shorter than the Queen, her figure both graceful and commanding. Elira moved with the same fluidity as her mother, though her presence lacked the overwhelming sense of dominance that Queen Athra exuded. She was striking in a way that defied human standards of beauty. Her skin shimmered with a soft, iridescent glow, and her eyes, large and almond-shaped, reflected the faint light of the temple like twin moons. Her features were angular yet delicate, her hair a cascade of silvery strands that seemed to float, as if unbound by gravity. Elira's gaze was unreadable, her eyes flicking over Stephen with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were weighing each step. Stephen felt his breath catch in his throat. There was something undeniably captivating about her, something that tugged at him on a level he didn't fully understand, but that only deepened his fear. The more he looked at her, the more he realized how alien she truly was. Her beauty was not of this world, and neither was her purpose. Elira stopped a few feet from him, her eyes still locked on his. For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Stephen found himself drawn into those eyes, pulled into a gaze that seemed to go on forever. There was something about her that made it impossible to look away. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You are afraid," she said, more as a statement than a question. Stephen didn't know how to respond. His mind was a storm of emotions, fear, confusion, and an odd sense of attraction that unsettled him even further. Of course he was afraid. This entire situation was incomprehensible. "You don't have to do this," he managed to say, his voice shaky but determined. This isn't right. Elira tilted her head slightly, studying him with those unreadable eyes. Right and wrong are human concepts, she said. In our culture, survival is what matters. My people are facing extinction, and you are the key to our future. Stephen shook his head. There has to be another way. Queen Athera's voice cut through the room, sharp and authoritative. There is no other way, human. Our bloodline is at risk. My daughter must bear an heir, a hybrid of our two species. Only then can we ensure the survival of the Valar. Stephen felt his stomach churn. He was trapped in a situation that defied all reason. His mind raced through possible scenarios. How could he escape? Could he reason with the Queen? Could he fight his way out? But no, the guards were too strong, and Queen Athera's power was overwhelming. Even Elira, standing before him, seemed to possess an inner strength that he could never match. And yet, there was something in her eyes, something conflicted. He could see it now, just beneath the surface of her calm exterior, a flicker of doubt, of reluctance. "You don't want this, do you?" Stephen asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Elira's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened, just for a moment. "It is not for me to want," she said. "It is my duty." Stephen's mind latched onto that word duty. It was the first crack in the seemingly unbreakable wall around her. She was bound by her mother's will, by the expectations of her people, just as much as he was bound by the threat of death. But there was more to it than that. He could feel it. Queen Athera's patience was waning. She stepped closer, her towering form casting a long shadow over both Stephen and Elira. "Enough of this. You will fulfill your role, human, or you will die here, in this temple. There is no other choice." Stephen's heart pounded in his chest. He felt the cold grip of fear tightening around him again. He looked up at the Queen, her eyes glowing with the same terrifying certainty as before. But then he glanced back at Elira, and he saw something different, something human, something that made him hesitate. He could feel her conflict. Elira was not just a tool of her mother's ambition. There was something more beneath the surface, something she wasn't saying. But was it enough to save him? He swallowed hard, his mind scrambling for a way out, for any way to change the course of the inevitable. "What if I refuse?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Queen Athera's expression darkened. "Then your life will end here, in this chamber." The ultimatum was as clear as it was final. There was no room for negotiation, no chance for appeal. Stephen's options were limited to one horrifying choice: submit or die. But then a thought struck him. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only thing he had. He turned to Elira, meeting her eyes once more. "And what do you want?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Elira blinked, taken aback by the question. For a moment, her stoic mask cracked, and Stephen saw a flash of vulnerability beneath the surface. Her gaze flickered toward her mother, then back to Stephen. The room was thick with tension, a tension that hung on her response. Elira hesitated, her voice faltering. The Queen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, watching her daughter with a cold intensity. Stephen pressed on. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Not like this. You have a choice." Queen Athera took a step forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "She has no choice," she spat, her voice like a whip. "This is her destiny. Her purpose is to ensure the survival of our people. You will not fill her mind with human weakness." Stephen's heart raced as the Queen's anger filled the room, her presence suffocating. But then, to his surprise, Elira raised a hand, her expression calm but firm. "Mother," she said quietly, "let me speak." The Queen paused, her gaze sharp, but she said nothing. Elira turned back to Stephen, her eyes softening. "You don't understand, human," she said, her voice low. "This is bigger than either of us. My people's survival depends on this. I cannot deny my duty." Stephen's breath caught in his throat, but he refused to back down. "And what about what you want?" he asked. "What if there's another way? What if you could choose?" Her face hardened, and the moment passed. Elira looked away, her gaze distant, as if considering a reality she couldn't afford to believe in. "I do not have the luxury of choice," she said softly, and Stephen could hear the weight of centuries of tradition, of duty pressing down on her. "This is what I was born to do. Without me, our people will die. Without you, I cannot fulfill that purpose." Stephen's chest tightened. He could hear the finality in her voice, the resignation of someone trapped in a fate they didn't entirely believe in but couldn't escape from. The stakes were so much higher than his own survival. This wasn't just about him. This was about an entire species, one that had lived for thousands of years, whose power and technology could reshape entire worlds. And yet, he couldn't help but feel that they were on the precipice of something dangerous. The Queen's cold manipulation, the way she viewed him not as a person but as a tool, an object to be used for the sake of her species, it unsettled him to his core. There was no empathy in her eyes, no understanding of the ethical lines she had crossed. Stephen's mind raced. He could feel time slipping away, the inevitability of the Queen's will pressing down on him like a heavy weight. He knew what was expected of him, what he would have to do to survive, but his instinct screamed that there was more at play here. The Queen's plan wasn't just about the survival of her race, it was about control, power, and perhaps something far darker. Stephen stood, taking a deep breath. He looked up at Queen Athera, whose icy gaze was still locked on him, and then back to Elira, whose expression had softened, if only slightly. He had to think of something, some way to delay the Queen, to buy himself time, anything to prevent himself from being thrust into this nightmare any further than he already was. Before we do anything, Stephen said slowly, his voice steadying, I need to understand more. If I'm going to help you, I need to know what exactly I'm getting into. You're asking me to do something that will change my life forever. I think it's only fair I know everything. Queen Athera's eyes narrowed. You question my will. I'm not questioning it, Stephen replied quickly, choosing his words carefully. I'm just saying that if I'm going to be part of this, if I'm going to be the one to save your people, then I need to know the full picture. I need to understand what this means, not just for me, but for you, for Elira, and for the future of your species. The Queen's lips curled into a faint sneer, her eyes gleaming with amusement. You think you can negotiate with me, human? Stephen felt a bead of sweat trickle down the back of his neck. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground, but he had no choice. He had to keep pushing, had to keep stalling. He couldn't let this spiral out of control without understanding what the true cost would be. I'm not trying to negotiate, he said, his voice firm. I just want to understand. You've told me what will happen if I don't agree. But you haven't told me everything. What exactly will this union entail? What happens after? What happens to me? Queen Athera regarded him with a cold, calculating stare, her head tilting slightly, as if she were measuring his worth, assessing whether or not to indulge him. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. Finally, after what seemed like an age, she spoke. You wish to understand what you will become. A part of her voice was low, dangerous. Very well, I will tell you. She stepped closer, her towering form casting long shadows over the stone floor as she loomed above him. Her presence was suffocating, her power palpable. Stephen could feel the weight of her gaze, like a predator sizing up its prey. The Valar are not like your kind, human, the Queen began, her voice echoing softly in the chamber. Our biology, our minds, our very essence are different from yours in ways you cannot yet comprehend. When you join with my daughter, it will not be a simple mating as it is for your species. It will be a fusion, a joining of mind, body, and soul. Stephen's mouth went dry. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. When you join with Elira. The Queen continued, her voice taking on a darker, more sinister edge, your consciousness will become linked with hers. You will share your thoughts, your emotions, your very being. The bond will be permanent, unbreakable. You will carry a part of her within you for the rest of your life. And she, a part of you. Stephen's mind reeled at the thought. He would lose himself in the process. His thoughts, his identity would no longer be his own. He would be intertwined with Elira forever, bound to her in a way that defied all human understanding. And what of Elira? What did she think of this? As if sensing his thoughts, Elira spoke, her voice quieter than her mother's, but no less steady. The bond is sacred to my people, she said, her eyes fixed on him. It is the way we ensure our survival. Through this union we gain strength from one another. You would not be harmed, Stephen, but you would be changed. Changed how? Stephen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elira hesitated for a moment, glancing at her mother before answering. You would gain some of our abilities, our knowledge, but it comes at a cost. You would no longer be fully human, you would become something more. Something neither fully Valar nor fully human. A hybrid. The word rang in Stephen's mind like a warning bell. He would become a hybrid, an amalgamation of two species, neither one nor the other. It wasn't just about creating a new generation for the Valar, it was about changing him on a fundamental level, about making him part of their world, their power structure. Queen Ethera's eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. This is what awaits you, human. A life intertwined with ours. A future in which you will never be the same. Stephen's heart raced. The stakes had risen far higher than he'd imagined. It wasn't just about surviving this ordeal, it was about preserving his very identity. If he agreed to this, if he mated with Elira, he would lose a part of himself. He would become part of their species, bound to them in ways he couldn't fully grasp. And yet, refusing still meant certain death. He looked back at Elira, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that gave him pause. She wasn't just the queen's daughter, a puppet to be used in her mother's game. There was a depth to her, a complexity that he hadn't seen before. She was bound by duty, yes, but she wasn't without her own desires, her own doubts. Stephen took a deep breath. And if I agree, what happens to me after? Queen Ethera's smile was cold and knowing. You will become part of us. Your life will continue, but it will not be your own. You will serve our people, our empire, as a vessel for the future. And you will never leave this planet. The finality of her words crushed the last glimmer of hope Stephen had been clinging to. He would never see his home again, never return to the Odyssey or the life he had known. He would be trapped here, forever bound to the Valar, forever part of their plans. A deep sense of dread settled over him. The Queen's ultimatum was clear: submit or die. But the choice wasn't as simple as life or death. It was a choice between losing his identity or losing his life. Either way, the cost was unbearable. Stephen's mind raced, searching for a way out, for any way to escape the Queen's iron grip. But the walls of the temple seemed to close in around him, suffocating him with the weight of her power, her control. He looked at Elira once more, and in her eyes he saw the smallest glimmer of something, a flicker of rebellion, of humanity. Perhaps, he thought, she was the key. But how could he turn her against her mother without losing everything? As the silence stretched on, Queen Ethera's patience began to wear thin. Her gaze hardened, and she stepped closer to him, her presence more oppressive than ever. Time is running out, human. Make your choice. Submit to your destiny or face death. Stephen's throat tightened. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind screaming for a way out, for anything that would save him from this impossible decision. But as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he realized that the true battle wasn't just for his life, it was for hers as well. The Queen's ultimatum was only the beginning. The chamber was eerily silent, the oppressive weight of the Queen's ultimatum pressing down on Stephen like an iron shroud. His heart pounded in his chest, and the breath caught in his throat. The choice he faced was impossible, yet every passing second made it clear that he had no escape. Queen Ethera's cold eyes watched him closely, her patience waning. Elira stood nearby, her expression still and distant, as if she were resigned to her role in this strange and terrible fate. Stephen swallowed hard, his mind racing through options, none of them appealing, none of them leading to freedom. He could feel the gaze of the alien guards on him, their silent forms waiting for their queen's command. The temple walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, as if the very structure of the place was alive, watching him as intently as the queen. A terrible thought crossed his mind. What if he wasn't just being asked to mate with Elira? What if there was something far darker involved in this union, something beyond physical intimacy? The Queen had spoken of fusion, of a bond that would connect him and Elira on a level deeper than any human experience. And yet, as terrifying as it was, he knew he couldn't refuse. If he did, he would die here, in this alien temple, his body left to rot in the bowels of this mysterious planet. The Queen took a step forward, her ethereal form casting a long shadow across the stone floor. "You have little time left to decide, human," she said, her voice low and commanding. "Choose wisely, for your fate is sealed either way." Stephen glanced at Elira again. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment he saw a flicker of something: empathy, maybe even compassion. She wasn't entirely a willing participant in this. He could sense her reluctance, her conflict. But there was something else, something deeper. She was as trapped by her destiny as he was by the Queen's demand. Taking a deep breath, Stephen spoke, his voice rough with tension. "If I agree, What happens next? Queen Athera's lips curled into a thin smile, as if she had already anticipated his submission. The ritual will begin, she said simply. You will be prepared. The words sent a cold shiver down Stephen's spine. Prepared. The way she said it implied that there was far more to this than he could understand, and it made him wonder what exactly the preparation involved. He wanted to ask, but part of him didn't want to know the answer. Elira stepped forward then, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving Stephen's. It is not as you fear, she said quietly. The ritual is not meant to harm you. Stephen looked at her, trying to read the truth in her expression. Then what is it meant to do? To join us, Elira replied. Her voice was soft, almost soothing, but the weight of her words was undeniable. Our species does not reproduce as yours does. The bond we form is one of mind, body, and spirit. It is a union that transcends the physical. Through this connection, we create new life stronger, more resilient. Our offspring will carry the essence of both our species, ensuring the survival of the Velar. Stephen's stomach tightened. It was exactly as he had feared. This was no simple biological act. This was something far more profound, far more dangerous. The idea of sharing his mind, his very essence, with someone he barely knew terrified him. But what choice did he have? He glanced at Queen Athera again. Her expression had not changed, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She was in complete control, and Stephen was just a pawn in her plan. If he refused, she would kill him without hesitation. If he agreed, he would lose himself, becoming something that wasn't entirely human. I'll do it, Stephen said finally, his voice shaky but resolute. I'll participate in the ritual. The Queen smiled, a cold and dangerous smile. Wise decision, human. At her command, the guards released their grip on him, stepping back into the shadows of the chamber. Queen Athera nodded to Elira, and the princess approached Stephen slowly, her presence calm but commanding. Come with me, she said softly. Stephen followed her, his legs feeling weak beneath him. He had no idea where they were going, but he knew that whatever happened next would change him forever. Elira led him through a series of twisting corridors, deeper into the temple's labyrinthine depths. The walls here were even more intricately carved, the glowing glyphs pulsing with a steady, rhythmic energy. It was as if the temple itself was alive, breathing, its heart beating in time with the strange symbols that adorned every surface. Stephen couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping over him. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. It was cooler here, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the glyphs and the soft sound of their footsteps echoing through the narrow passageways. At last they arrived at a large chamber much smaller than the throne room but no less imposing. In the center of the room was a stone platform, surrounded by pillars that stretched high into the darkness above. The glyphs on the walls here glowed brighter than those in the corridors, casting an eerie, blue-green light across the space. This is where the ritual will take place, Elira said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of sadness. It is sacred to my people. Stephen glanced around the room, his skin prickling with a sense of foreboding. The platform in the center of the chamber was adorned with strange, alien symbols, more glyphs, though these seemed to pulse more rapidly, as if reacting to their presence. What happens now? Stephen asked, his voice quiet, though it echoed in the large space. Elira turned to face him, her eyes softening as she spoke. You will lie on the platform. The glyphs will guide the connection. It may be overwhelming at first, but I will be there with you. You will not be alone. Stephen's heart raced. What do you mean by overwhelming? Elira hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. The bond we form is not like anything your species has experienced. It will open your mind to mine, and mine to yours. You will feel everything I feel, and I will feel everything you feel. It is a merging of consciousness, of emotions, of memory. Stephen took a step back, his pulse quickening. The idea of something invading his mind, his thoughts, terrified him. He wasn't prepared for this. How could he be? I don't know if I can do this, he admitted, his voice shaking. Elira's gaze softened, and for the first time he saw real compassion in her eyes. I understand your fear, she said quietly, but I promise you, I will not harm you. The bond is meant to strengthen us both. It is the way of my people. Stephen looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of deception, but all he saw was a deep sincerity. She wasn't like her mother. There was a gentleness to Elira, a kindness that the queen lacked. She was as much a victim of this situation as he was, bound by duty to fulfill her mother's plan. "I'll try," he said finally, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. Elira nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "That is all I ask." With that, she motioned for him to approach the platform. Stephen hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, his legs feeling heavy as he climbed the few stone steps that led to the center. The platform was cool to the touch, its surface smooth beneath his fingers as he lay down, his body tense and uncertain. Elira stood at the edge of the platform, her gaze steady and calm. She began to chant softly, her voice melodic and strange, the words unfamiliar but somehow comforting. The glyphs around the platform began to glow brighter, their light intensifying as the chant continued. Stephen felt the energy in the room shift, the air growing thicker, vibrating with a power that was ancient and otherworldly. As the chanting grew louder, Stephen felt a warmth spreading through his body, starting at his chest and radiating outward. His skin tingled, and a strange pressure began to build in his mind, as if something was gently pushing against the edges of his consciousness, urging him to open up, to let it in. "Relax," Elira's voice whispered in his mind, though her lips hadn't moved. "Let it happen." Stephen's heart raced, but he tried to steady his breathing, focusing on the sound of her voice. Slowly, the pressure in his mind began to ease, and a strange, almost dreamlike sensation washed over him. His thoughts seemed to blur at the edges, merging with something else, something that wasn't him but was becoming part of him. And then, suddenly, it was as if a door had been flung open inside his mind. A rush of emotions, memories, and sensations flooded in all at once, overwhelming him with their intensity. He gasped, his body tensing as the torrent of foreign thoughts and feelings washed over him. He could feel Elira, her fear, her sadness, her sense of duty, and beneath it all, a deep, unspoken loneliness that cut through him like a knife. At the same time, Stephen realized that Elira was feeling his emotions as well. He could sense her surprise at the depth of his fear, the weight of his confusion, and his desperate longing to return home, to escape this alien world and the terrifying future that now lay before him. Their minds were intertwined, their consciousnesses merging in a way that Stephen had never thought possible. It wasn't just thoughts they shared, it was everything. Every emotion, every memory, every sensation was laid bare, with no barriers between them. It was intimate, invasive, and terrifying all at once. Through the maelstrom of shared thoughts, Stephen could feel Elira's presence, calm and steady, guiding him through the storm. Her voice whispered in his mind, soothing him, helping him to navigate the overwhelming flood of sensations. "Breathe," she whispered. "You are not alone." Stephen struggled to regain control, to ground himself in the midst of the chaos. His mind felt like it was being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once, but Elira's presence was a constant anchor, keeping him from being swept away. Gradually, the intensity began to subside, the flood of emotions slowing to a more manageable flow. Stephen could feel Elira's mind beside his, their thoughts still connected but no longer overwhelming. It was as if they were two currents running parallel, separate but intertwined. He could still sense her emotions, the weight of her duty, the sadness she carried, but there was something else now. A strange sense of comfort, of understanding. They weren't so different, after all. Both of them were trapped by circumstances beyond their control, forced to follow paths they hadn't chosen. "You are stronger than I thought," Elira's voice whispered in his mind, and he could feel the warmth of her approval. Stephen didn't respond, but he could feel a sense of relief settling over him. The worst of it was over, but the bond between them had been formed. He could feel it, deep within him, a connection that was now permanent, unbreakable. He was no longer entirely human. He was something else now, something in between, a hybrid of two worlds. As the last of the ritual's energy faded, Elira stepped back from the platform, her expression unreadable. Stephen sat up slowly, his body trembling from the intensity of the experience. He looked at her, and for the first time he truly understood the weight of what had just happened. He was bound to her now, bound to this planet, to her people, and to their future. Elira met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "It is done," she said softly. "You are one of us now." The words echoed in Stephen's mind, and he realized that his life would never be the same again. And somewhere, deep within the shadows of the temple, Queen Ethera smiled. The days after the ritual blurred together in a haze of confusion, fear, and strange alien sensations. Stephen had never felt so out of place in his own body. His mind buzzed constantly with the presence of Elira, a low hum of her thoughts, emotions, and memories flickering through his consciousness like distant stars in the night sky. It was subtle, like background noise, but it was always there, a reminder that he was no longer fully human. Something had changed inside him, something permanent and irreversible. He had become a part of them. The Queen's plan was no longer just an abstract concept, it was an inescapable reality. The Valar's future now rested on his hybridization with Elira, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on him like a suffocating fog. Even though the initial intensity of the mind meld had passed, Stephen could still feel the bond pulsing within him, a constant, living thing that tied him to Elira and the Valar's future. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced, both intimate and invasive. He had lost part of himself in the ritual, and now he was tethered to a destiny that wasn't his own. But something deeper had begun to stir in the days following the ritual. The quiet whispers of rebellion had started to take root in Stephen's mind, fueled not by anger, but by an awakening sense of injustice, of being used. His connection with Elira had given him more than just a bond. It had granted him insight into the depths of her own fears, doubts, and hopes, things she had never voiced aloud, not even to her mother. He realized now that Elira wasn't just a pawn in her mother's game. She was a reluctant participant, bound by duty but haunted by the question of whether she truly wanted the future her mother had forced upon her. For days, Stephen had remained in the temple, a prisoner not of chains but of circumstance. The guards watched him constantly, though they did not speak. He could sense their unease around him. Perhaps they sensed the shift in his nature, the strange amalgamation of human and Valar that now pulsed beneath his skin. He was no longer entirely like them, but not entirely different either. He was caught between two worlds, and neither side seemed to know what to make of him. Elira visited him often, though their conversations were brief. The weight of the bond between them made their interactions strange, fraught with unspoken emotions. She was distant, but not unkind. Stephen could sense her own conflict growing, especially now that the ritual had been completed. It had changed her too. The temple, with its dark corridors and pulsating glyphs, had become both a sanctuary and a prison. Stephen wandered its halls in silence, trying to understand his new reality, trying to come to terms with what had happened to him. He could feel the power of the place humming in the air around him, the ancient, alien energy that seemed to pulse through the very stones. It was clear now that this temple wasn't just a relic of the Valar's past, it was a living thing, deeply connected to their existence. It was as though the temple itself was watching him, waiting for something. One day Elira appeared before him in one of the darkened hallways, her silver hair catching the light from the glowing glyphs on the walls. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotions just beneath the surface. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper but filled with urgency. Stephen studied her for a moment, sensing the turmoil inside her. About what? She glanced around, making sure no one was nearby. When she was satisfied that they were alone, she spoke again, her voice lower this time. "About my mother. About what's really going on." Stephen felt a flicker of surprise but didn't let it show. He had suspected for some time now that Queen Ethera's plans extended beyond simply ensuring the survival of her race, but he hadn't known how deeply the deception ran. "Go on," he said, keeping his tone neutral. Elira hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to tell him. Then, with a heavy sigh, she began to speak. "My mother. She's not just trying to save our people," Elira said, her voice tinged with a bitterness that Stephen hadn't heard before. "She's trying to consolidate power that goes far beyond Azeron 5. The hybrid she's forcing us to create isn't just for the survival of the Valar, it's to create something more. Something unstoppable." Stephen frowned, his heart beating faster. "What do you mean? What does she want with me with us?" Elira looked away, her jaw tightening. "The hybrid child. Our child. Would possess the strengths of both our species. Valar intelligence, psychic abilities, longevity, combined with human adaptability, resilience, and physical strength. It would be a perfect being, a new kind of ruler, stronger, smarter, and more powerful than either of us could imagine. And she plans to use that ruler to extend her control, not just over this planet but over the entire galaxy. Stephen felt a chill run down his spine. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality all the more horrifying. Queen Ethera wasn't just trying to save her people, she was building a weapon. A weapon she could use to dominate not just her own world but any world she chose. And he had become an unwilling participant in her twisted vision of conquest. "We can't let her do this," Stephen said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "There has to be a way to stop her." Illyra's eyes met his, and for the first time Stephen saw the raw vulnerability in her gaze. "I know," she whispered, "but I don't know how." Stephen's mind raced. The Queen had all the power, all the resources. Her psychic abilities alone made her nearly invincible. But she had one weakness: Illyra. Despite her cold and calculating exterior, Queen Ethera's plans hinged entirely on her daughter. Without Illyra's cooperation, the Queen couldn't proceed with the creation of the hybrid ruler. That was the key. "We have to leave," Stephen said suddenly, the words spilling out before he had fully thought them through. "We have to get off this planet, far away from her. Without you, she can't complete the ritual." Illyra looked at him, startled by the suggestion. "Leave? How?" "There are guards everywhere. My mother can sense everything that happens in this temple. We would never make it." Stephen shook his head. "There has to be a way. You've lived here your whole life, you know this place better than anyone. There must be a way to escape without her knowing." Illyra hesitated, biting her lip. Stephen could feel her inner conflict, the war raging inside her between loyalty to her mother and the desire for her own freedom. But as the seconds ticked by, something in her shifted. Her eyes hardened with resolve. "There is a way," she said quietly, "but it's dangerous. My mother has her mind linked to the temple. She uses it to monitor everything that happens here. But there are places deep within the temple where her influence doesn't reach, hidden chambers that even she cannot control." Stephen felt a surge of hope. Then that's where we need to go. If we can reach one of those chambers, we can plan our escape from there. Illyra nodded slowly, though her expression remained tense. "It won't be easy. The guards are always watching, and the temple is filled with traps. But I can guide us through. If we can make it to one of the hidden chambers, we'll be safe from her influence at least for a time." Stephen knew the risks were enormous, but he also knew that staying here meant certain doom. The Queen's plans would soon come to fruition, and once the hybrid child was created, there would be no stopping her. They had to act now, before it was too late. "When do we go?" Stephen asked. Illyra glanced at the corridor behind her, her eyes sharp with determination. "Tonight, when the temple is at its quietest, we'll have the best chance of slipping away unnoticed then." Stephen nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. They had a plan. It wasn't much, but it was their only hope. The night fell quickly on Azeron 5, the twin moons casting a cold, silvery light over the temple's ancient stones. Stephen stood in his chamber, waiting for Illyra to return. His nerves were on edge, every sound, every flicker of movement in the shadows putting him on high alert. He knew the Queen was always watching, always listening. The temple's walls seemed to hum with her presence, a constant reminder that they were never truly alone. But Illyra had promised that there were places even the Queen couldn't reach, and he trusted her. When she finally appeared at his door, her face was set in grim determination. She carried a small bundle of supplies, her eyes flicking around nervously as she handed it to Stephen. "We have to move quickly," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "The guards are changing shifts soon. That's our window." Stephen nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Together they slipped out of the chamber and into the labyrinthine corridors of the temple. Illyra led the way, her movements swift and confident, though her face betrayed the fear lurking just beneath the surface. They passed through dark hallways, the ever-present glow of the glyphs casting eerie shadows around them. Every sound seemed amplified: the soft rustle of their clothing, the faint hum of the temple's energy, the distant echo of footsteps from unseen guards. Stephen kept his head down, trusting Illyra to guide them through the maze. He could sense the tension in her, the fear that they would be caught at any moment. But there was also a determination in her that mirrored his own, a desire for freedom, for escape, for a life that wasn't dictated by the Queen's iron will. As they moved deeper into the temple, Stephen began to feel a subtle shift in the air, the oppressive weight of the Queen's presence, the psychic energy that seemed to pulse through every stone began to fade. It was slight, barely noticeable at first, but it was there. The further they went, the more distant the queen's influence became. Illyra led them down a narrow staircase, the walls closing in tightly around them. The glyphs here were dimmer, their glow fading as they descended further. The air grew cooler, almost damp, and the silence was deafening. At the bottom of the stairs, Illyra paused in front of a large, sealed door. It was made of the same dark stone as the rest of the temple, but the glyphs on its surface were different, older, more intricate. They pulsed faintly, as if alive but dormant, waiting for something to awaken them. "This is it," Illyra whispered. "One of the hidden chambers. My mother's influence doesn't reach here." Stephen's breath caught in his throat. This was at the moment of truth. If they could get inside, they would have a chance to plan their escape. But if the queen somehow discovered their location, if she sensed what they were doing. Illyra placed her hand on the door, her fingers tracing the ancient glyphs with practiced ease. There was a soft hum, and the glyphs flared to life, their light illuminating the stone in a brilliant flash. The door slid open with a low rumble, revealing a large, circular chamber beyond. Stephen stepped inside, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. The chamber was vast, its ceiling stretching high into the darkness above. The walls were covered in more of the ancient glyphs, but these were different from the others he had seen in the temple. They pulsed with a different kind of energy, stronger, more primal. It was as if this room had been untouched by time, preserved in its original state for centuries. In the center of the chamber was a large, circular platform, similar to the one where the ritual had taken place but more elaborate. The air here was cooler, the atmosphere less oppressive. Stephen could feel the absence of the queen's presence, her psychic energy no longer pressing down on him like a heavy weight. They were safe. For now. Illyra closed the door behind them, her shoulders sagging with relief. "We're safe here," she said quietly. "She can't reach us in this place." Stephen looked around the chamber, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. They had made it this far, but the real challenge was just beginning. They had to find a way off this planet, a way to escape the Queen's control before it was too late. But for the first time since arriving on Iseron 5, Stephen felt a flicker of hope. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice firm with determination. "We're not her pawns anymore." Illyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up." Stephen met her gaze, the bond between them humming softly in the back of his mind. He could feel her strength, her resolve, and beneath it all, her fear. But they were in this together now, bound by fate and circumstance. And together, they would fight. The rebellion had begun. The hidden chamber was still, its air thick with a sense of ancient power and untapped potential. The faint hum of the glyphs on the walls pulsed like the steady heartbeat of the temple, a rhythm that both comforted and unnerved Stephen as he sat in silence, gathering his thoughts. Time had lost its meaning in the depth of the temple. He wasn't sure if they had been there for hours or days, but he knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. Illyra stood on the far side of the room, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the glyphs, her features tense and drawn. She was staring at the circular platform in the center of the chamber, lost in thought, her silver hair catching the flickering light. The weight of their shared bond still pulsed between them, a constant presence that made it impossible for Stephen to fully separate his own feelings from hers. He could sense her fear, her uncertainty, but also her fierce determination. This place, so steeped in the history of her people, had once been a refuge. Now, it was their only chance at survival. Stephen approached her slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. "We can't stay here much longer," he said, breaking the silence. "Sooner or later, your mother will realize we're gone." Illyra nodded but didn't look at him. "I know. But escaping the temple is only the beginning. If we make it out, she'll hunt us down. She'll use every resource at her disposal to find us. She won't stop until she has what she wants." Stephen clenched his fists, his mind racing through possible scenarios, each more dangerous than the last. He knew Illyra was right. Queen Aethera's psychic influence was vast, and her control over her people absolute. She could easily manipulate the Valar to find them, and once they were discovered, there would be no second chances. "We have to be smarter than her," Stephen said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. If we can get to your people, if we can convince them of the Queen's true intentions, there might be a way to fight back. Alara finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with doubt. My people won't defy her. She's ruled them for centuries. They believe in her vision, in the idea that the hybrid will lead us into a new era of power. To them, she's more than a ruler, she's almost a god. Stephen frowned. The more he learned about the Valar, the more he realized how deeply ingrained Queen Athera's control was. She had manipulated her people into believing that their survival hinged on her every decision. But there had to be someone, some faction within their ranks, that could see the truth. There had to be a way to break her hold. Maybe not all of them, Stephen said carefully. There's always resistance. People who see through the lies, even if they don't say it out loud. What about you? You're her daughter, and you don't believe in what she's doing. Alara's face softened for a moment, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. I don't know what I believe anymore. All my life I've been told that my purpose is to ensure the survival of our race, that the only way to do that is by creating the hybrid. I've never questioned it until now. She paused, taking a deep breath. But now I see how much she's willing to sacrifice, how much she's willing to control, and I wonder if this has ever really been about our survival, or if it's just about her power. Stephen stepped closer, sensing that Alara was on the verge of something important, something she hadn't fully admitted to herself. You're not alone in this, he said softly. I'm with you. We can stop her. Together. Alara looked up at him, and for the first time, Stephen saw the full weight of her inner struggle. She was torn between the duty that had been forced upon her and the growing realization that her mother's plans were not as noble as they seemed. But she wasn't ready to give up hope entirely. There was still a part of her that wanted to believe in a future where her people could survive without being enslaved to her mother's ambitions. We can try, Alara said, finally, her voice barely a whisper. But we'll need allies, and we can't do this alone. The plan came together in whispers and half-formed thoughts, shaped by desperation and the slim hope that they could find a way to break free of the Queen's control. Alara explained that deep in the heart of the Valar society were factions that had grown uneasy with the Queen's iron grip, though they had never dared to oppose her directly. There were those who remembered a time before Queen Athera's reign, when the Valar were less obsessed with dominance and more in tune with the natural world around them. Alara believed that these factions, while small and hidden, could be swayed to their cause if they could be convinced of the Queen's true intentions. But it wouldn't be easy. Queen Athera's power extended far beyond her physical presence. She could influence minds, manipulate emotions, and bend the will of her people with frightening ease. Alara's plan was risky, but it was the only option they had. The first step was leaving the temple unnoticed, a task that seemed impossible given the ever-watchful guards and the Queen's psychic influence. Alara, however, had an advantage. As the Queen's daughter, she had been trained to mask her thoughts, to shield herself from the constant mental surveillance that the Queen imposed on her subjects. It was a skill that had taken years to master, but it was their only hope of slipping away undetected. Stephen, on the other hand, had no such training. His mind, still reeling from the ritual and the lingering effects of the bond, was an open book. Alara had warned him that if the Queen even sensed the faintest trace of rebellion in his thoughts, she would know instantly. That meant Stephen had to rely entirely on Alara's abilities to shield them both as they made their escape. The night of their departure was thick with tension. The temple felt more oppressive than ever, the air heavy with the Queen's psychic presence, even though she was nowhere to be seen. Stephen and Alara moved through the labyrinthine corridors, sticking to the shadows, their movements swift but cautious. Every step felt like it could be their last, every creak of the ancient stone beneath their feet, a potential death sentence. Alara's ability to mask their presence was remarkable. Stephen could feel the strange sensation of her mind wrapping around his, a protective layer that kept his thoughts hidden, his fear and anxiety suppressed. It was like being enveloped in a warm, invisible cloak, though the sensation was disorienting and left him feeling slightly disconnected from reality. They passed several guards, their silent forms standing sentinel at key junctions throughout the temple. Each time they approached, Alara would pause, her focus intensifying as she mentally blocked their awareness. Stephen held his breath, his heart hammering in his chest, as they slipped by unnoticed. The further they went, the more daring they became, until they finally reached the outermost edge of the temple, where the thick jungle began to encroach on the ancient stone. Outside, the air was cool and damp, the jungle alive with the soft sounds of alien creatures stirring in the night. For a moment, Stephen allowed himself to believe they might actually make it. "We need to reach the underground city," Elira whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling of leaves. "It's the only place where the Queen's influence is weaker. There we can find those who will help us." Stephen nodded, though he had no idea what lay ahead. The underground city was a place he had only heard mentioned in passing during their briefings, a relic of the Valar's past, buried deep beneath the surface of Iron 5. It was a place where the dissidents and outcasts of Valar society had fled, those who had refused to bend to the Queen's will. If they could find allies there, they might stand a chance. But as they moved deeper into the jungle, Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence seemed too heavy, too unnatural. It was as if the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, out of the darkness, came the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and growing closer. Stephen's pulse quickened. He glanced at Elira, but her face was set in grim determination. She had sensed it too. The Queen's guards had found them. The next few moments were a blur of motion and fear. They had barely enough time to react before the figures emerged from the shadows. Valar guards, their sleek forms almost invisible against the dark foliage, their eyes glowing faintly with the same eerie light that illuminated the temple glyphs. Elira moved with a speed and grace that Stephen hadn't seen before, her training as the Queen's daughter coming to the forefront. She lashed out with a blade Stephen hadn't realized she carried, her movements fluid and precise, cutting through the guards with a ruthless efficiency that left Stephen momentarily stunned. But the guards were relentless, and more appeared from the shadows surrounding them. Stephen's heart raced as he tried to defend himself, but he was no match for the Valar's advanced combat abilities. They were faster, stronger, and more experienced. Just as he thought they were about to be overwhelmed, Elira unleashed a psychic blast that sent the guards reeling, their minds momentarily shattered by the force of her attack. It was a power Stephen hadn't realized she possessed, a glimpse of the psychic potential that Queen Athra had instilled in her daughter. But the effort drained Elira, and Stephen could see the exhaustion in her eyes as she staggered back. The guards were still coming, their numbers too great to hold off forever. "We have to go," Stephen shouted, grabbing Elira's arm and pulling her away from the oncoming attackers. They ran deeper into the jungle, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. The trees loomed tall and oppressive, their twisted branches seeming to reach for them as they fled. Stephen's mind raced, searching for any escape route, any way to lose their pursuers. But the jungle was dense, and the guards were gaining on them. He could feel the Queen's presence, distant but growing stronger, as if she were closing in on them from afar. Then, up ahead, Stephen saw a narrow crevice in the ground, barely visible in the darkness. It looked like a natural formation, but something about it felt intentional, like it had been placed there for a reason. "This way," Stephen shouted, leading Elira toward the crevice. They squeezed through the narrow opening, barely fitting between the jagged rocks. The sound of the guards faded as they descended into the darkness, the crevice widening into a series of tunnels that twisted and turned beneath the jungle floor. For what felt like hours, they moved through the underground labyrinth, the only light coming from the faint glow of the stones around them. Stephen's body ached, his mind was numb, and his lungs burned with exhaustion. But they kept moving, driven by the desperate need to escape the Queen's reach. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, and Stephen gasped at the sight before him. The underground city. It was more magnificent than he had imagined, a sprawling network of stone buildings and glowing bridges, all built into the walls of the massive cavern. Strange, bioluminescent plants lined the pathways, casting an ethereal glow over the entire city. Valar figures moved silently through the streets, their faces hidden beneath hoods and masks, their eyes flickering with suspicion as they noticed the newcomers. Stephen turned to Elira, his breath still ragged. "Is this it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is this where we'll find help?" Elira looked out over the city, her expression uncertain. "It's our best chance," she said quietly. "But even here, there are those who fear my mother. We'll have to be careful." Stephen nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. They had made it this far, but the rebellion was only just beginning. Queen Athera's reach was vast, and they had only bought themselves a little time. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Stephen allowed himself to hope. The underground city stretched out before them, a a hidden sanctuary beneath the surface of a world controlled by a tyrant. It wasn't much, but it was something, and together he and Elira would find a way to stop the Queen's plan. The galaxy's fate was still uncertain, but the rebellion had begun, and Stephen knew, deep in his heart, that they would not fight alone. A new dawn was coming.